When Moses in the Old Testament, he saw the burning bush that was never consumed. And that convinced Moses that God exists. Nowadays, you can buy online a burning bush that will never be consumed, and it would have impressed Moses. All I'm saying is technology, when it's advanced enough, well beyond what we possess right now, can show up as a miracle, can be very impressive, convince us that there is something much more powerful than us. And this dose of modesty is really needed now.
Greetings, welcome to Ancient Library. This is UFO, UAP Shapes and Forms, Flying Disc and Saucer-Shaped Craft, part 2 of a series in which I go deeper on certain UFO UAP types determined by their shape, trying to deliver all the information I could gather so far, separated by the eventually meaningless appearance or shape of a UFO. I think it's a good way to sort and process certain interconnected information which is spread through the whole field of ufology in sightings, contact cases or theories of programs mentioning alleged man-made UFOs and black projects, and things of that nature. So before we start, a quick word on the structure of the video. We will start with the first chapter called The Flying Saucer, A Timeless Design, followed by a selection of 5 cases and sightings, including disc-shaped craft, since the year 1950. In chronological order, 2 more recent times, a quick breakdown of the data, followed by ideas and theories on why and how disc-shaped craft seems to be a very popular choice for supposed ET pilots, since the earliest of days of UFO reports in recorded history. Proceeding to hit a brief UFO physics segment including data on Thomas Townsend Brown, progressing to expand the mind on topics like connections between disc-shaped UFOs, 90-degree maneuvers, and potential time travel scenarios. So without further ado, let's jump right in. The Flying Saucer, a Timeless Design. So before we go deeper on this particular shape of spacecraft, I want to say something about the term UFO in general. So UFO means unidentified flying object, and the ability to identify things varies between individuals in regards to their education, knowledge, and general level of intelligence. So for example, if a person without the knowledge about the existence and nature of meteors sees a meteor, the person would describe his sighting as a UFO via definition. So the use of the term is indeed very subjective and connected to the personal level of ability to understand things. Many decades ago, the first big wave of UFO hype hit the modern world in the most typical shape and form of a flying saucer or disc, which were also depicted and used in different sizes in big science fiction movie productions, and successfully embedded as the most iconic depiction of a classic UFO. The first big wave I mentioned was basically initiated by the 1947 Roswell incident with the according newspaper article, talking about a crashed disc, meaning an unknown spacecraft in shape of a disc or saucer. And we all know the following newspaper article regarding the matter, and the most likely start of the deep state age, and the beginnings of the CIA shortly after Roswell. So it seems like they might found something which in their eyes justifies all these secret shenanigans, which are progressing to recent times in regards to UFO secrecy, national security, etc. let me add as well, even way before 1947, from ancient times on, disc and saucer-shaped UFO-type flying machines were depicted on walls in old temples or other historical sites. These depictions can also be interpreted in century-old paintings and pictures of many sorts, cutting through a broad spectrum of cultures and locations from all over the world. There's reason to believe that a few years later, human approaches to build potential flying disc-shaped craft with a new generation of propulsion technology, anti-gravity, involving people like Thomas Townsend Brown and others, and supposedly contains attempts based on electrogravitics and spintronics to achieve anti-gravity effects and positive lift. These concepts are broadly labeled pseudoscience in today's day and age, so it either worked and went dark or it didn't, but we will expand on it later in the video. So let's talk about some cases involving disc-shaped UFOs. I've prepared 5 sightings, 4 of them coming in with video, and I want to say here that I don't know the exact truth considering these videos and pictures, but I will try to give you my synopsis on each of them while we run through the list in chronological order. Starting with the first case. The McMinville sighting 1950 in the United States. Clearly one of the oldest alleged photographs of a flying disc, and many say of a UFO in general. I don't exactly know how many photographs are existing from the sighting, but there seem to be multiple. One thing I've noticed is if searched in the general media on addresses like Wikipedia, the data about this case is very critical, and the word hoax is used a lot of times in small paragraphs. I'm about to dive a little deeper into the case in my personal research, but the current UFO UAP narrative is not welcoming this pretty much classic of a case. And I want to put it on the start on this list, because it's one of the oldest alleged pictures and cases of a UFO dating back to the year 1950. And it's also disc-shaped, and this is also the only case on this list which is not coming in with footage, so stay tuned for more.
Hier sehen Sie Semyases Strahlschiff auf einer weiteren Filmaufnahme vom 28. März 1976, ebenfalls oberhalb Fischental, jedoch bereits in den Abendstunden kurz vor Sonnenuntergang. Bei diesem Filmteil können Sie einige wenige Einzelheiten des Schiffes erkennen, so unter anderem auch das langsame sich Drehen des Schiffes während dem Flug, sowie aber auch das zeitweilige Aufleuchten von Lichtern am Schiff selbst.
So this is footage from the Billy Meyer case. I got a lot of content on my channel featuring this case because I think it's a very magnificent and at the same time very controversial case. And it features a lot of footage with disc-shaped UFOs inside. And yeah, I picked some of the videos which are more hard to explain. And you can see different craft in here. In this video you can see them free on the screen. Each of them got a little own movement pattern, so I don't know, some people think it's on a string there, but I don't see any strings here. And this footage is allegedly 50 years old, so I don't know how this guy is doing this, to be honest. And yeah, that's another one. You can see him zoom in on the craft, and you can see red lights, and you can see a subtle movement and texture of the craft. So yeah, I want to hear any opinion about this case, and even if you're critical about the case, show me the stuff which is debunking the material, only looking for the truth. Up to the next one.
William, ven. William.
William Rivera assures us that Marvin was quite shaken.
No, he wouldn't calm down. He was still very, very worked up. You see, I believe that this was a UFO. I have no doubt it wasn't man-made. And why was it here? We don't know.
The movements that the craft makes and its appearance prove that it could not have been a conventional earthly vehicle. According to Marvin's description, the object was about as large as the wheel of a large tractor. It wouldn't have been large enough to hold a normal-sized person.
So the Tarbaca, Costa Rica encounter 2007, or often called the Motorola Razr UFO recording, which explains itself as well as the raw quality of the video. A very particular thing can be seen, the often mentioned 90-degree angle turns, which is often reported in sightings which involve disc-shaped craft or saucer-shaped UFOs or UAPs. The UFO in this case seems fairly small, and my first impression is that the whole situation seems very genuine. The guy who is recording screams at his buddy who is working loud machinery, and what I've also observed is the slightly fearful turn the guy with the Motorola Razr did while recording. It seems to me that he flinches after the craft moved and initiated the 90-degree angle maneuver. So my first impression is pretty positive on this 2007 Tarbaca case. The recording circulates for almost 2 decades now, and if anybody knows more than me about this recording, please let me know. But let's continue with the next case.
Tut sabit. Aynı yerde. Aynen. Bak tam ayın altında bu. Denize yakın. Denize yakın. O nerede? Vallahi bak aşağıda. Denizin üzerinde bu. Denizin üzerinde gibi. Aynısı be. Gir şuna.
Gir abi gir. Affetme.
Abi girdim ona.
Şu büyük yıldız olan videosu parlıyor.
Abi gördün mü?
Ha.
Valla.
Ne kadar parlak değil mi Salih?
Sana gir yüzüne gideceğim.
Sen görüyor musun?
Gördüm.
Aa, nasıl bir şey bu ya? He?
Felaket.
So this set of recordings are straight out bizarre, and the fact that he is able to record several craft in the same location and time is crazy. I'm talking about the Kumburgaz Turkey videos from 2008. And at first I thought this was one singular case and craft and recording, but he seems to have recorded almost a half of a dozen crafts which look clearly different. Maybe these crafts are able to change shape or the surface area which is reflecting light in a different way, but aside from that, it's clear to say that these Turkey UFO recordings from 2008 are very remarkable and not really debunked, even in the broader mainstream. The significance of these potential genuine recordings seems to be nebulized by the still existing strong stigma and strong trust into the deep state-controlled government entities free after the premise, if you would have made contact, the news and government would let us know. Many people were not even consciously thinking that thought, but subconsciously they don't want to waste their energy for a zero-sum game called ufology. But back to the recordings. Many crafts under the same circumstances, long duration and not the worst of the worst in terms of quality. I would be very curious about the result of a serious scientific analysis of these videos from Turkey. But on to the next one.
Dude, this is a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. Oh my gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is the LNS, dude. Well, if there's like... Look at that thing. It's rotating.
So the Gimbal East Coast USA government drop from 2015 came in a free piece of 3 short unclassified videos from Navy ships. I want to include a straight government release in this list in the episode to show that the whole field is evolving and is growing from multiple angles. Not that it's necessarily a good thing to declassify random small bits instead of a potential groundbreaking HD or 4K video which would elevate the perception regarding these questions on Earth. In this about 40 seconds long clip, you can see an uncolored instrument recording of a disc-shaped craft which is not emitting any known sources of propulsion. and also does a 90-ish degree turn at the end of the sequence, which is clearly noticed by the present military personnel. So here we seemingly got two totally different recordings of a UFO of a certain shape conducting the same type of maneuver. To pull a rather weak analogy at this point, if primitive hunter-gatherer would see a man on a fast motorbike performing a wheelie before he's going to accelerate his bike to very high speeds, it would resemble a similar thing. But like I said, not the best analogy from my side. So we finished the list. And before we progress to the next segment, I want to go back to the first case. The McMinville photograph, which allegedly happened 1950. This was the earliest I could start on this list if I'm wanting to include any photographs or video. This was the first time humans on our planet were doing the first serious attempts to achieve anti-gravity propulsion. And very smart scientists like Townsend, who I've mentioned at the start of this video, and others were researching exotic concepts involving all kinds of elements of physics. And before we go deeper in a small UFO physics segment, I let Jesse Michels present a quick synopsis on T.T. Brown and the matter to get things started.
Have you seen my Townsend Brown episode?
No. Wait, is that the guy who the 26-year-old engineer?
No. This guy is a mid-century inventor. He's born in 1905, died in 1985. And he worked with like most of the kind of big aerospace companies. And then you have like all of these really interesting, credible witnesses around gravity experiments that he did with these asymmetric capacitors. So you have a negative charge plate, positive charge plate, neutral insulator in the middle. You pump the whole thing with kind of like megavolt range electricity, and you get this weird, this acceleration from the negative plate to the positive plate, even when the positive plate is faced upwards. So it's basically like ability to manipulate gravity through pure electromagnetism as the input. And, that would be this insane novel thing. And he claimed to replicate it in a vacuum chamber, which is like the main detraction on this experiment is that ion wind is causing the thrust. So if you're in a vacuum chamber, you don't have ion wind. And there are other variations of the experiment that involve negating the ion wind component. And like Edward Teller was a credible witness. I've met Townsend Brown's daughter, who talks about Edward Teller being in the room, freaking out around, saying, I don't know how this works, around Townsend Brown's fan precipitator experiment. You have this technical consultant at Wright-Patterson, or Wright Airfield at the time, named Victor Bertrandius, freaking out. You have Agnew Bonson, who forms the Institute of Field Physics and is funding Brown, but also doing funding the most frontier theoretical physics at the time and establishing quantum gravity. He says strange things happen at high megavoltage across short distances. He's clearly talking about Brown's experiments. And then the interesting way in which this ties into the UFO story is like that magnesium bismuth, we talked about in the Gary Nolan thing. So magnesium bismuth is this thing that Brown talks constantly about because it's a high K dielectric, meaning it stores a lot of electromagnetic charge. The higher the K factor on the material and the insulator in between the two capacitors, the greater the thrust you get. And so barium titanate, magnesium bismuth, a lot of these materials that come up, in this interesting way around the UFO conversation are part of Brown's experiments and are in his like Winter Haven proposal. And so that could make you a cynic, and you could be like, oh, that's like, maybe it's all like cover for some gravity thing or whatever. But Brown himself was very trippy, and he would talk about being in touch with Space Brothers. And like
Space Brothers.
Yes. And like he and his daughter had a UFO experience. And he attributes a lot of his initial work and knowledge to a UFO experience he had on Catalina Island, which is a UFO hotspot.
The fucking Catalina wine mixer.
That it all started there.
So Jesse Michels, love him or hate him, is a good example for a self-taught person in regards to all of this UFO physics stuff. As far as I know, his education is based in history, which I guess is a solid foundation if your goal is to unveil government secrets and connect the dots regarding problematic events which happened in the last decades, especially regarding his country, the US, which seems to play a major role in the current status quo of modern UFO disclosure. On planet Earth, the first connection between flying discs and UFO physics especially started in the late 1930s. At least, stories about old advanced Nazi tech and the so-called Flugscheiben, which is German for flying disc, came to light. God knows if Nazi Germany was close to a breakthrough considering anti-gravity propulsion in disc and saucer-shaped models. Fact is that they had pretty advanced stuff like highly developed rocket systems, submarines, and the very first generation of a fighter jet. But I think anti-gravity and flying discs are many more levels too extreme in relation to, let's call it, power levels of these technologies. But it's safe to say that at least myths about Nazi flying discs were born at that time, like the Foo Fighters, etc. So maybe there are technological propulsion concepts which require or hardly support a disc-shaped design in the first place. And Thomas Townsend Brown, who seemingly started to demonstrate with these very flying saucer look-alike models, and the basic premise is, like we heard from Jesse, that we got two separate parts of the craft which are spinning in opposite direction, based on electrogravitics and things like spintronics. And before I embarrass myself trying to talk more about deeper expert knowledge requiring physics stuff, I will stop and will recommend you some more educated people which are willing to build a UFO by themselves without any government or NDAs involved, as well as experts in the field like Jack Safadi and others, which I will link in the description for anyone who's more interested in the deep physics aspects and the more purist technological angle of the whole UFO subject matter. Fact of the matter is that there are many different shapes of reported UFOs and UAPs which emit the same insane speeds or other abilities that this shaped craft seems to be able of doing, so we really can't determine any clear reason for using a particular shape or design to build an efficient spacecraft. I guess one thing is that there are most likely many intelligent species out there who found different ways to achieve travel with craft based on, for us Earth humans, very advanced propulsion concepts, so way more advanced than fuel-burning rockets. Serious interstellar travel will not be achieved with rockets. The maximum potency combined with a lot of human suffering is the Moon and Mars and maybe another body relatively near to our planet. But that's like driving a bicycle on a high-speed highway, but it's not even remotely enough, to be honest. We can only speculate on why the disc-shaped design seems so popular in the universe, and maybe it's related to our atmosphere or the Earth's frequency, also called the Schumann resonance, but let's go even further.
And then you can get into like, you know, weird physics models that are like honestly a little above my pay grade, but like this, you know, idea of like Tipler disks and like, you know,
Tipler disks.
Yeah. So you had like Gödel had this like, Kurt Gödel had this idea of like time travel, in the early 20th century. And then you had this guy, Frank Tipler, who was like later in the 20th century. And Gödel's whole thing was like, you could time travel, but like you'd have to like, basically like travel like an extremely long distance, and like it's like in effect like works, but like it doesn't really like it's totally theoretical. It's like impossible. And then Tipler had, and again this is a little above my pay grade, but Tipler had this idea of like shrinking that down to literally a disk, which is hilarious because like that's what we describe UFOs as.
So in the UFO physics community, there's a perspective of if one achieves an insane amount of what we consider speed, time becomes relative as well, which allows theoretically with the right technology to conduct something what we would label as time travel. So to speculate a little here, reaching possibilities of interstellar travel with the speed of light or higher, everything becomes accessible. We know time exists, it's not a human construct, but measuring time is one. We got a system in which we measure time to manage our lives on a collective and individual basis. We also know distance, time and speed is related, and if we got 2 out of the 3, we can measure the last one. There are not many UFO cases delivering a detailed explanation of the propulsion systems or other technological specifications. There are cases mentioning disc-shaped UFOs running on more than one propulsion system, one for the planet's atmosphere and one warp drive or tachyon drive of propulsion system which is using a whole other level of technology, doing things like breaking every atom in the ship down into data or light, which is maneuvered with high speeds, speed of light or higher, and reconstructed on the desired location, so some science fiction stuff of the highest order, reaching levels of sophistication we can barely fathom, if at all. And the relation to especially disc-shaped craft is vague and mostly speculative. Of course, there were concepts by Earth human scientists like Thomas Townsend Brown, Tesla, and the aforementioned Third Reich Flugscheiben, meaning flying discs. The future will show if these people were on the right track considering their enthusiasm on the matter. So for the last chapter, I want to talk about some general UFO-related things and give a quick synopsis on the 5 presented cases I've quickly ran through earlier in the video. So the McMinville sighting is often mentioned by ufologists as the first good picture of a UFO. At the same time, it's described stone cold as a hoax on Wikipedia and other general narrative-forming assets on the Internet Library. This is also the case with the first video clip on this list from the Billy Meyer case. I've talked a lot about this case in my For Lion playlist, so if you're interested in some unbased neutral data, check out the playlist. Besides that, I can repeat myself and ask everyone who has seen serious material that debunks the case to show me the stuff from which seemingly many people derive their judgment about the Swiss case. Otherwise, they just seem right off the case because of its wild nature. Occam's razor and so on. Talking about razor, the next clip was recorded on a Motorola Razr flip phone, a device which is broadly known by my generation, and the incident doesn't really ring my alarm bells regarding bullshit. And it also depicts something which can be called a 90-degree angle maneuver, which scared the guy holding the phone, which is reflected by his flinching at the time in the video. So 1 out of 1,000 recordings showing these things which are screaming real to me. Doesn't mean everything on YouTube is a real UFO, but a good fraction of it seems to be worthy to investigate, saying this in late 2024. The next video showing several different crafts in Turkey in 2008. To this day, I never heard a person calling this fake, with any reasoning of significance. Aside from the wild nature of the recording, everything seems legit. I would like to hear thoughts on that one in the comments. The last one on the list is the Gimbal UFO clip, showing a disc which also conducts a 90-degree turn, but in a whole different style than the Brazil one. Not really much to say about that one. Could be spoofing or man-made UFO, messing with other sections of the acknowledged government. For people who are interested in these government cases, I can recommend the David Fravor USS Nimitz Tic Tac encounter. There's a whole arc behind these 3 released government UFO videos to explore if you are rather new to ufology. Like I already mentioned in the first part of this UFO UAP shape series, there's no clear synopsis in the end because we don't really know much about these things, and it's very superficial to sort them by shape. But we have to start somewhere. We have to start to break down the data, and I will continue to progress through any known shape of UFOs known to man, with more episodes in the future. Like always, I will source the used data and give more links to related people in UFO physics and the covered cases, and everything else in the video. So thank you for taking your time to watch the video and consider subscribing. All the best, LIBRA.
Take this pathway of like reasoning, right? You have Robert Hastings, UFOs and Nukes. You have an extremely credible database of 170 people who do not get into this job due to any sort of histrionic, attention-seeking desire for UFO, you know, for themselves. They don't want to be famous, you know, and UFOs keep showing up around our most precious, important assets. And every time they do, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations shows up and they threaten them and say, we're going to screw with your career and, you know, swear them to secrecy. And in certain cases, the people get deleted from the government, like Bob Jacobs. And then their superiors later have to say they were real. Okay, so
what happened with Bob Jacobs?
They said he never worked at Vandenberg, and he's a photo instrumentation specialist there. That in '64 sees this, you know, UFO wrapping around this dummy nuclear Atlas V warhead. And so, you know, you hear these stories over and over and over again. And then you could still say, right, like, okay, it's a credible database. Like, these people are really smart and high agency, but like maybe it's like still this like U.S. deep state thing, and like they like somehow like prime all the nuclear people, and like it's this, you know, maybe that's like this pro, like, you know, trying to like make people think that we're protected by the aliens or something. By it's like orbs are showing up. I don't know. You can spin some tall tale, but then you get into the fact that there are UFO sightings in Bariloche in Argentina because there's a civilian nuclear grid there. And there's literally a town in Japan, in Ino, right in Fukushima, next to the prefecture, where they have all their nuclear energy, that is like dedicated to UFOs. And there's a museum there that's all around UFOs. And so like you hear enough of this stuff and you're like, there is a there. I don't, like anybody that's like, this isn't worthy of investigation. I'm like, you just have like bad Bayesian reasoning. Like you have this a priori bucket that you just put like, you put this stuff into. You put it in the impossible bucket. You don't look at it. You're not looking at it earnestly. Like you didn't listen to what I just said. If you actually take in the fact pattern that I just gave, then you have to think this stuff is real. And then, yeah, is there a possibility there's some mastermind being like, and somehow atomic secrecy is overlaying this stuff, and like these scientists were involved, and the Australians also thought they were involved, and like, you know, the magnesium bismuth is showing up here, but it's also in the Townsend Brown stuff. Like maybe, I don't know, but like, I don't know. That feels like all of a sudden, if that's your null hypothesis, the null hypothesis becomes more of a stretch, more of a logical stretch than just there's some intelligence here that's not human. That all of a sudden becomes a more epistemically acceptable base case. And actually, like if you're, what are you saying? You're saying there's some cabal that's controlling Bariloche, controlling Japan, and controlling our nuclear assets? Like, what are you actually proposing if you look at the real fact pattern?